I was 9 years old. We were living in Virginia. We didn't move out here until I was 10 or 11. I can't really remember. And the images that were coming across the TV screen were really worrying me. They were disturbing me. Peter Jennings, every night on the nightly news, had new pictures. He had new video footage. He had new interviews with people that were in the Persian Gulf. And all the violence and the outbreak and what was going on over there. And every night that was coming into our house and on our television set. And I was beginning to get worried. I was beginning to fret. I was beginning to be a little anxious about what was going on in the Persian Gulf. And there's a few reasons for that. And one of them was just simply that I didn't have a good sense of geography at the age of 9 to know how far the Persian Gulf was from Norfolk, Virginia. I didn't know that what I was seeing on the television probably was not going to come to my doorstep. And all I saw was the tanks and the jets and the planes and the men and the women and the children that were suffering through that. And the other reason I had to be really worried was that my dad was in the Navy. And I knew that in any moment, any day, he could be called into service to go to war in the Persian Gulf. And so every night I went to bed, I was praying and I was thinking and I was up later than I should have been, wondering if my dad was going to have to go to war, if he was going to have to go and fight in the Gulf War. One day my mom and dad came in, sat us all down, and my dad was indeed called to go to Washington, D.C. to help fight the war. Again, my geography is not good, so I did not know that Washington, D.C. was not actually anywhere close to the Persian Gulf and that he would not actually physically be in harm's way. All I knew is that for 6 weeks of the summer, I was not going to see my dad. He was going off to war, and my image of that war was what was coming through the nightly news and Peter Jennings. And so from the time that they told us to the time that I left, I went to bed and I was worried if I would ever see my dad again. What's he going to do? Is he going to be okay? Is he going to be in harm's way? What's going to happen? Throughout that 6 weeks, I carried on. We carried on with life as usual, as best we could, but deep down there was a sense that something was missing. I was kind of worried about my dad. I was wondering if I was going to see him again. There was kind of an emptiness. There's a hole in my heart inside deep where I can't even really explain it to you here today, that I just needed to know how my dad was doing. And we got a calendar out and we started putting X's on the calendar, and as the X's started adding up and the weeks started going by, the worry started to subside a little bit, and it started to become a little bit more of anticipation. 3 more weeks, and Dad should be able to come home. 2 more weeks, and Dad should come home. Hey, maybe it might be this weekend. And then we got the call that 6 weeks wasn't the minimum and that he was going to be there only 6 weeks and he was coming home. Well, I was so excited. I went to bed that night and I slept like a rock because I knew Dad was going to be home that weekend. And I was looking forward to that weekend with eager anticipation. And we got the call that he had landed at the airport and that he was on his way home. And in my house, we had a big bay window that looked out on the front street, which was Tidewater Drive. And in the back, we had a little window by the door that looked out on the side street. And for probably about 45 minutes, I was going from one to the other, back and forth throughout my house, eagerly anticipating and watching for the headlights that were going to come down the streets to see if that was my dad. Is that my dad? Is that the blue Dodge Omni? Is that the blue Dodge Omni? Is that the blue Dodge? Nope, that's a red station wagon. That's not my dad. And then I would run to the back door. Nope, that's a green slug bug. That's not my dad. And finally, it was the blue Dodge Omni. And I can't really tell you all that happened in the next 2 minutes, but I knew that I was going to be the first one to my dad, and I was going to be the first one to hug him. And I flew out the back door, I flung the gate open, and really, honestly, one of the last things I remember is that I jumped. And I know my dad's briefcase went flying one way, and his hat went off, and I just buried my face in his shoulder, which really wasn't comfortable because I had those Navy tags on, but I didn't care. So I just buried and I just held my dad because I knew that my dad was safe and my dad was back. In James chapter 5, James knows something. James knows that life has the ability to shake us to the core when we least expect it. Life has the ability to spring up and to suddenly throw something at us, to suddenly shake us with something when we least expect it. Maybe even when we least desire it, when we least want it, but definitely when we least expect it, that life can be shaky. Life has the ability to put you on the edge in an instant, to put you on the edge of worrying and wondering, and how am I going to get through this, and how are we going to make it, and am I ever going to see my dad again? Or putting you on the edge of waiting and going, all right, this is God's plan, this is God's timing. Life has the ability to throw you on the edge, to shake you in an instant and in a minute. And if you turn to James chapter 5, we're going to go verse 7 to 12 this morning. We're going to do it rather quickly. I just want to share with you three instances, three circumstances that will put you on the edge in life. Three circumstances or three instances that will put you on the edge. They have the ability to put you on the edge. And the first one from James chapter 5, verse 7, we'll just start there and I'll start reading. Be patient then, brothers and sisters, until the Lord's coming. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, patiently waiting for the autumn and the spring rains. You too, be patient and stand firm, because the Lord's coming is near. The first situation that will put you on the edge is that of the farmer, where you're unable to control life's circumstances. I know you've been in this situation. I think we've all probably been in this situation. If you haven't, I'm sure you will be. But as the farmer, a farmer would be one who does the hard work. He's planted the seed. He's tilled the ground. He's laid the fertilizer. He's done all that he needs to do on the front end of his situation so that he can guarantee as best he can a fruitful and a plentiful crop. And yet he still can't control the rain. He still has to trust and wait on God to bring the rain. And there are times in our lives where the circumstances where you have done all you can, where you have done all you know how to do. You've done all that you know the Bible tells you to do. And there are times in our lives that we just have to wait and trust on God because the circumstances are outside of our control. I just think of parents who are launching their kids out into the world. They're going to college. And for the past 18 years, you've trained and you've taught and you've tried to disciple and you've tried to work with and teach. And you're at that point now where you're launching them into the world, and it's in some ways a very real sense of being outside your control. You've done everything you can like the farmer, and then life circumstances and life situations are going to take over. Think of looking for a job if you're out of a job and you're jobless. And the reality is that not having a job is a full-time job. And so you've done everything you can. You've put your resume together. You've gone to all the interviews. You've prayed. You've done everything that you need to do. You've prayed for favor in the eyes of the boss. You've prayed for wisdom as you interview. And you've done everything you possibly can. And now it's just outside of your control. Life circumstances are just outside of anything you control. And it's in God's hands, and you're going, now what do I do? How do I handle that? What's next for me? And you're on the edge in that moment of worrying or waiting. Do I wait on God and His timing and what He has for me, or am I going to worry myself sick about how all these things outside of my control are going to take over and how they're going to happen? The other instance, the other situation is that of the prophet. If you read in verse 10, James says, brothers and sisters, as an example of patience in the face of suffering, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. You may find yourself put out for doing what's right. Three situations that will put you on the edge, being put out or being put down or being put off for doing what's right. The Old Testament prophets continually preached and talked about what God told them to talk about. It was the right thing to do, and yet they were continually beat, put out, put down, left for dead, left to starve. And in fact, Isaiah, God comes to Isaiah and says, Isaiah, I want you to teach, and I want you to preach, and I want you to talk to the people for 40 years, says Isaiah. And Isaiah, for 40 years, they're not going to listen to you. I don't know about you, but if you told me that for 40 years I'm going to preach every Sunday and no one's going to listen to me, who am I kidding? That happens anyway. But anyway, so... But for 40 years of that, I don't know if I'd be up for that. But Isaiah's up for it. And you're going to find yourself, and you may find yourself right now this morning, and you may find yourself in this situation in the future where you did the right thing. You stood up for what's right. You said yes or you said no, whichever one of those two things was the right thing to do in the situation, and now you've broke, that friendship broke because you did the right thing. Or maybe that job is gone because you did the right thing. Or maybe now you're in the doghouse at your job because you did the right thing and wouldn't look the other way. That situation will put you on the edge of worry. It'll put you on the edge of, do I worry and do I fret and do I take over myself, or do I let go? Do I wait? Do I wait on the Lord? What do I do now? Now what happens? And then thirdly and lastly, James mentions Job. As you know, we count as blessed those who have persevered, who have heard of Job's perseverance, and have seen the Lord finally brought about in him. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy. Verse 11. Job was a man in the Old Testament. He's got his own book, 42 chapters, and he was wealthy beyond any of our wildest imaginations. And God, honestly, through a conversation with Satan, decides to test him and take it all away from him. And for 42 chapters spanning years of Job's life, Job's in this situation. There's no answers, and there's none that seem to be coming. And you may be in that situation this morning. You may be in that situation, you may know somebody in that situation where there's just no answers for what's happening. And there doesn't seem to be any answers coming. There's none on the horizon, and you just don't know if you're ever going to get any answers. For years of Job's life, and honestly through the entire book of Job, he struggles with that. And honestly, he doesn't get many answers as to why it happened. And those three situations have an ability to put us on the edge. Do we worry? If I was in that situation, am I going to worry? If I am in that situation this morning, am I worrying? Am I fretting? Am I so tied up in knots? Or am I going to wait on the Lord? Here's what I love about James. James is not trite or stupid, and he's not going to write and tell you, hey, here's 3 quick ways to solve your problem. And that's not even in this text. I love James doesn't try to solve the issue. James just writes over and over in this text, and he goes, brothers and sisters, brothers and sisters, brothers and sisters, let me help you get through it. He's not interested in getting rid of it. He wants to help us get through it. How do we get through it? When life shakes us, when those situations have the ability and they put us on the edge and we're facing worry in the face, we're facing waiting on the Lord in the face, we're face to face with those things, what do we do to get through it? And James doesn't give us a 3-step process to get rid of it. He gives us some principles to get through it. And it's simply this. When life's shaky, focus on the unshakable. When life is shaky, focus on what's unshakable. Focus on the unshakable. Twice in this text, James says, the Lord is coming. The Lord is coming. The Lord's coming is near. And I think one of the things that we got to focus on when life is shaky is the promises of Christ. That they're unshakable. Christ's promises are unshakable. And here's the truth. Christ came down to the earth. He walked on this earth as a man, as me, human flesh, and you. And he walked and he taught and he died on a cross. And with his blood, he bought each one of us. And he was buried. And after 3 days, he rose again. And then he walked around with his disciples a little more. And then as he was going into heaven, he said, I'm going to prepare a place for you. And I'll be back for you. I'm coming to get you. And then you're going to be in eternity with me forever. Where there won't be any more tears, and there won't be any more sorrow, and there won't be any more fear, and there won't be any more worry. And that promise is always true to us. That promise is always true to us. And the other promise that's always true to us is that God's character is unshakable. James goes, the Lord is faithful, is full of compassion and mercy. James goes, focus on Christ, focus on what's always true, and focus on God, focus on what's always true of God. God's character, no matter what we go through in life, no matter how hard we're shaken in life, will never change. He will always be compassionate. He will always be faithful. He will always be merciful. He will always be loving. He will always be gracious. He will always be jealous for you. He will always be long-suffering. He will always be those things. Christ's promises will always be true. God's character will always be true. And James says, in order to get through the tough times, focus on what's unshakable in the midst of your being shaken, in the midst of life not going the way we think of it. And then here's what I love about James as well. James doesn't absolve us of our responsibility to act in a manner that is worthy of the gospel. Because at the end of this section, the end of these verses, verse 12, above all, brothers and sisters, do not swear, not by heaven or by earth or by anything else. All you need to say is yes or no, otherwise you will be condemned. When life's shaky, do the right thing. When life is shaky, do the right thing. There is no circumstance in your life, in my life, that absolves us of our responsibility to act in a manner that is worthy of the gospel. The people that James is writing to were being persecuted, they were being taken advantage of financially, they were being beaten, they were being put out, they were being separated. There is no circumstance in their life or in our life that releases us from acting in a manner, from doing the right thing, from obeying God in every circumstance. But that's what we want to do. That's our tendency and that's our temptation to go, if I just move the decimal place over 1 on the tax return, then my jobless situation wouldn't be so bad. I could take care of this if I just moved it over 1. If I just told, I don't even have to tell a lie. I'll just tell part of the truth that I know is true, and I'll just tell part of it. I'll tell a half-truth. And that would get me out or begin to get me out of this situation. And James goes, no. Your character stays intact no matter what situation you walk through. Focus on the unshakable when life is shaky. And when life's shaky, do what's right. James says, no, you know what you should do? You should do what's right. Because you're never going to go wrong by doing right. And you're never going to go right by doing wrong. Always do what's right, James says. Worship team, why don't you come on up? Worship team's going to come up. One of the things that I think that has helped me through some tough times is honestly just to worship. Just to recommit and to refocus on Christ and His promises and God and His character. And I'm not saying that it's not hard. I'm not saying that your life, you're not going through a difficult circumstance. And I'm not saying that it's no big deal and that you'll be able to get through it just fine and suck it up and make it through. I'm just saying continue to refocus yourself on the promises of Christ. Continue to recalibrate yourselves to the character of God. And continue that no matter what happens, commit that no matter what happens, you're going to do the right thing. And that your situation is not going to determine your ethics. It's going to be your character that determines what you do. So I just want to invite you right now to just stand and just in a moment of silence, just go to God as the worship team comes up and begins to play. Just go to God and say, God, I just want to refocus. I just want to recommit. Whatever you're going through, whatever life's thrown at you that's shaking you right now, just take that to God. Focus on His promises. Focus on His character. Just commit to doing the right thing no matter what happens today, this week, next week, in the future. So why don't you stand with us and just worship with us. You are, that is your character, that will never change. You are higher, you are stronger, you are more powerful. And Lord, nothing that we go through, nothing that happens on this earth, nothing that happens in our lives will ever change who you are. It will never change how much you love us. It will never change the promises of Christ. Lord, we just thank you and we worship you. Thank you that you are unchangeable, no matter what. In your name we pray. Amen. On the Edge wraps up next week. We will see you back here then. You're dismissed.